Did your dad actually train you for wrestling?
Well, a lot of guys did, really. Dad had the very best guys, really. My dad was trained by Stu Hart, who was Owen and his father, and all of those brothers, Bruce and Shuey and Smith and all those, it's a big family, wrestling family up there in Calgary. And our family lived with those guys, and they trained Dad, and all great folks, good family friends. And then, Jose Lothario helped to train me, and as well as Mills Mascaras, two Mexican stars, and then there were other wrestlers from England. John Foley came over and wrestled with me, really taught me a lot of wrestling. And Billy Robinson, also United Kingdom, and another guy over there named Fred Sinclair, Sinclair. What was his name? Sinclair. Bob Sinclair. Anyway, I can't really remember. It was so long ago, but there were some really guys that are just real astute students of wrestling in that part of the world over there. And then also there's a different style of wrestling down in, say, the India and the Southern Africa, where they do a lot of leg wrestling. Everything's pretty much all below the waist. And what they have up in the north of the equator would be catch as catch can, they call it. It's all Roman Greco throws above the waist. And so it's kind of, it's professional wrestling, but it's kind of geared on two different sports, In Mexico, it's a whole new ball game. It's lucha libre. It's almost like playing ping pong.
When you were learning to wrestle, there are so many styles of wrestling that you can do, and all of them are extremely popular. How did you find the style that worked for you?
Nick, man, I'm sorry to piss you off, bro, but I mean, the fact is, it's really not a lot of styles in wrestling are popular. Well, the only one is you kick that guy's ass, or you're going to get your ass kicked. That's really how it goes. It's pretty simple. You got to want it more than he does, and you got to get in the ring. And I mean, okay, you got 15 minutes, and he may look good or whatever, but you've got to let him remember you. And so you've got to give it. If you want to be a king, you've got to kill a king. And just like anything else, the only style that is effective is, a guy told me he was into wrestling for love of the sport of professional wrestling. So are you crazy? I'm only in it for the money. It's the only reason I am in wrestling. I'm sorry to say, but yes, it's for the money. That's how it was at me for me when I was a little kid. And so I'm going to get in that ring. I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to get you to look away, whatever I can do, and I'm going to snatch you, and I'm going to put your shoulders to that mat, 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to walk out with winner's pay. And eventually I'll be noticed, and I'll get a championship match, and I'll stay on top by being that way. I'm sorry to disagree to them, but there are a lot of styles to wrestling, I suppose, but there's always a successful style is going to be you take that match to your opponent. And if you don't, well, then you will go home with loser's pay.
I just meant in terms of like lucha libre and stuff like that, and you get Mexican wrestling, which is entirely different to American wrestling. So when you were training, also another thing, you were trained by some amateur wrestlers, I think it was. I know your dad was trained by Stu Hart, who was a very well-known amateur wrestler. Did you learn that side of wrestling as well?
Yeah, the Jerry Briscoe, they taught me, and they were really great amateur wrestlers. A lot of good amateur wrestlers have taught me. And in fact, there was a day when all of our holds were submission holds, really, and you could move back on the joint rather than lock the joint and to dislocate. And so there was a time when all of the wrestling was pretty much taken from amateur wrestling or from locks and holds, like it had become so popular, especially in the Soviet Union. In the early days of wrestling, there was the Mighty Milo, and if you might have heard of some of these names, back in the carnival days, were just they would come to town and challenge the toughest guy in town, and either beat him or let him look kind of good and come back next year and make him look a little better, but beat him anyway, and things like that. It was the early days of wrestling when it started.
How did you feel when your brothers decided to get into wrestling? Were you concerned?
And I was real concerned. I was worried to death, to tell the truth. I thought I was the only one that was going to do it. In fact, when I started off here in Hawaii, I thought that I would be just the only Von Erich, and so I named myself Von Erich. I didn't even call myself Kevin. And so then when my brothers came into it, yeah, after I'd had about a year and seen how cutthroat the business was, and how if you've got a bad knee, if you got a bad right knee, then you got to wrap your left knee, because that's just telling the other guy that this is the knee to attack. It was a cold-blooded business, and I was worried about my brothers getting into it. Yeah, but they did well.
I interviewed Jake the Snake Roberts and Jimmy Snuka about the most important thing in wrestling, which I think a lot of wrestlers talk about, is psychology. I mean, how did you find that difficult to pick up?
Yeah, I guess I did at first. I wasn't really sure what I just do my best. I thought, well, as an athlete, that works. If you do your very best. And in wrestling, that's not enough. You have to project, and it's got to be that guy in that very last seat in the very top row, of the building. And so you've got to put out your message that, and work in such a way that, everyone in the building can see it, not just the people that are up close, and so it does take some exaggerated motions and things like that, and it takes things like, you do want to go ahead and I mean, I know exactly what you're saying. It's like the psychology of wrestling, lifting people up and letting them get with you, and all you have to. It is a science, and it's a real important part of wrestling. But it's what makes the match go. It's the meat and potatoes of the whole show. I mean, you've got a good guy and a bad guy, and that's gets boring after a while. You've got to tell a story.
Someone who was an instrumental part of World Class Championship Wrestling in terms of the booking was Gary Hart. What do you think made him so instrumental to the success of World Class?
Well, no doubt Gary Hart was a genius. He was really great at what he did, but he also had Bronco Lubitsch and a personality too. That he had he got along with the wrestlers real well. Yeah, and so that made wrestlers want to come into your territory when the booker is like a guy they can get along with. Everybody loved Gary. And so it was easy to get wrestlers to come in and wrestle in World Class. And especially, even though the work was quite a bit harder, it was like, a lot of territories you could go and pretty much lay in a hole in the middle of the ring and pretty much get your pay that way. But in Texas, they had to really be in shape and really work hard. And as long as it was a muscle group and not a bone, without breaking someone's bone, then it's going to get hit good and hard. So you need to be in good shape. And so we had a lot of young guys come down here and with that in mind, and had their heads on screwed straight. And Gary was a big part of that. And yeah, it made for like Kabuki, for instance. He didn't look like he was that much of an athlete, but man, his feet were so quick. He could kick like a snake strikes. It was like he broke my cheekbone, and I mean, I learned, you never turn your back on your opponent. That's what you just learned that day one. Well, Kabuki turned his back on me, and I couldn't believe it. And I thought, that idiot. And I took a step toward him, and man, he broke my nose and cheekbone. And it was because he was doing one of those kicks I'd never seen before. And so I knew after that, after I woke up, because it knocked me out for a minute. But I learned after that, watching when Kabuki turns his back and bends over.
In terms of when you became big in World Class, how difficult was it to deal with the fame side of it?
Oh, well, yeah, it was a lot of fun being seen going on and traveling to different countries, and we had this friends over in United Arab Emirates send an airplane to pick us up. We had a lot of fun, and so it was a lot of, we could have anything we wanted to do. We could do whatever we wanted. It was the most fun as any. I guarantee you, no one had more fun in the '80s than I did and my brothers. We had a blast.